guys, here come the dollies. They got fresh sinkers, hot coffee, and the sweetest smile.
Welcome back to the Clubmobile, everybody. We're so happy to have you joining us today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back.
And joining us today is Cress Dondi, author of The Navigator's Letter. I've been so excited to talk to you since I picked up the book.
Me too.
I loved it.
I am just thrilled to be on this show, and I'm so glad you guys share these stories of World War II because they really are important. And I'm honored that I'm on this show with you guys.
Oh, we're honored to have you.
We feel the same.
We do.
Exactly
We feel the same.
Jan, for those that don't know much about you or your book, could you give us a quick synopsis of the book, and could you also tell us a little about yourself?
Okay, I'll start with myself. I was born in the small town of Hillsborough, Illinois, where the book took root. It's about three youths coming to age from the same town that I was born in. I grew up in Atlanta. I graduated from University of Georgia with a Bachelor of Science, and then I actually went to Alaska on a one-way ticket and ended up staying there for 6 years. And I got a teaching certificate so I could teach out in the bush, but I decided I didn't want to do that. And then I reconnected with a college sweetheart who was in Texas. I was sent to Texas on a discovery job. I was a litigation paralegal up there. And they sent me on a job, and I thought I'll look him up. And so we ended up getting together and moved to Florida, so I've kind of made a whole round circle to
Whole
Florida.
circle there, yeah.
Yeah.
We have 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. My one daughter has 4 children, age 6 and under. And my lifetime profession was a litigation paralegal. I quit when I was about 60, I think. Oops, probably shouldn't say what my age is. But I retired at a certain point in life, and that's when I sort of started this story.
Amazing.
So this is your first book.
This is my absolute first book, and it's definitely been a labor of love because it's a story about family. The story was, I'll tell you a little bit about the story, and then I can tell you the process in getting it.
Yes, please.
On the surface, it's about the U.S. campaign to destroy Hitler's oil fields. As you guys probably know, when it was a time when victory in World War II depended on one critical element, and that was oil. And tanks don't roll, ships don't sail, and planes don't fly without it. So America decided to go after Hitler's oil source at Ploesti, and they paid a terrible price. The narrative is really about the U.S. campaign to destroy Ploesti oil fields, which is Hitler's fuel source. They started out with tidal wave, which was a very detailed, organized operation. That morning, of the 1,700 airmen that took off, 532 did not return. It was a very dangerous mission, a crazy mission, and it was considered Black Sunday because they lost so many men that day. Months later, the Air Force regrouped in southern Italy and with the 15th Air Force, and they flew missions through the summer of 1944, and they lost over 2,300 men over Ploesti. So it was a serious target. The book sort of culminates with a humanitarian mission, Operation Reunion, which is the largest evacuation by air in history, repatriating some 1,200 men back to American air bases in Italy. But I will tell you, at its core, the Navigator's Letter is much more than a military history. It's a deeply human story told through the voices of 2 B-24 navigators, John B. and Bob, who happen to be my uncle and father. And it's through the chaos, seeing it through their experiences, the war unfolds not only amid missions and survival, but through the connections that endured amid wartime chaos. So that's sort of the gist of the book. It's history with a human heartbeat. It's not a straight history book, although it's to the book. It's been corroborated with the National Archives. I have a serious number of sources in the back of the book that corroborate everything that I've found or discovered.
So because the story itself is about your uncle and your father. Was this something that was spoken about when you were growing up, or was this a story that you found later on in life and that you felt compelled to write about eventually?
So it's a little bit about both, to be honest. What kickstarted the whole project was I found 500 or 600 letters in a footlocker in my mother's basement. And these letters, I found them. I always knew about the letters, but I didn't actually pick up the letters until my mother passed away. And I started reading them, and I realized I had a piece of history in my hands, and it was really important to think, what am I going to do with this now? So originally, I created a chronology, and then I decided to make a book. I thought about making a book for my cousins because I wanted them to see how awesome their uncles were. But I will tell you, my whole life prepared me to write this story. Long, long ago, when I was very young, I had insomnia, and my father would tell me bedtime stories. And instead of fairy tales like most kids get, I would get dive bombing Stukas and daring escapes from enemy prisoner of war camp, or interrogations by Aryan officers. My father was fluent in German, so he could really play a good story or tell a good story.
Right.
Through high school, I wore a POW bracelet during Vietnam, and that prompted a lot of discussion with Bob, my father. And we always took walks in the park. He would always point out Cassiopeia, Orion's Belt, the North Star. It was always a big deal. I wish I could remember all the stars he pointed out, because it was a time when they didn't have GPS. So of course he knew everything about the stars. And he always answered questions. He wouldn't boast about whatever happened, but he would tell stories. If I asked him a question, he would tell stories. And I knew that there was a lifelong connection between he and John B. And so, of course, I was always asking questions about John B. And I guess when in the 80s, they were sworn to secrecy for 50 years, not to tell anybody what horrors they saw. And so I think in the 80s, he started going to reunions with his POW friends, and they started talking to each other, and they said, why do we have to keep this a secret? It's driving us crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
So they came back, each of them came back, and they started writing memoirs in a way. Bob wrote some of the anecdotes of growing up on the farm and some different stories. Then when he got lung cancer, I decided to videotape him for about 8 hours just to find out, tell us about what all happened. So we were able, and this was back in the early 90s. So I was able to get that, but I still hadn't discovered the letters at that point. So all this stuff led, plus being a litigation paralegal didn't hurt, nor did love of travel, because I had to travel a lot to find out all the research for this book. But when he died, I still hadn't found the letters. It was not until we cleared out the house that I was able to find these letters. And that's what really kickstarted the project. I would read them, and, of course they were sentimental. It was a wonderful journey through. It was cathartic to read these letters. And I really thought, what am I going to do with them? And the best thing was to think about doing it for my cousins, but to make them authentic and to write the kind of book that John B. and Bob deserved, I felt like I needed to authenticate everything that was in their letters. So I went to the National Archives. I got bomb group reports, bomb group diaries, Air Force diaries, missing air crew reports, official documents, operations reports, just everything that I get my hands on. I probably went through 100,000 documents. In the early days, 15 years ago, you had to order a disc and pay $10 per disc. Like I would Hello Esty. I'd get the disc, I'd load it in my computer, and I would get maybe 2 documents out of it that were interesting. And I'd say, I want to find out more. So I'd go back and I'd come up with another term. Eventually, some of those documents were put on reels online, so you could look. So about 10 years ago, they were much easier to gather. Now they're much, much easier to gather. And to gather. But so of the American documents, I probably went through 100,000. But I went to Romania. I met with an aviation archaeologist. We went to the crash sites, and I went to the POW camp. I went to, we actually went to the U.S. Embassy, and I spoke about my father's visit there. And the aviation expert gave me the name of the pilot that claimed my father's plane. So I wanted to meet this guy if he was still alive.
Right.
So I
Right.
did everything I could to try to find this guy. We went to the German archives. I couldn't get it online because they wanted his date of birth, his residence, and all that stuff. I tried
Yeah.
to go on Facebook and look for him, thinking maybe somebody was named after him, and maybe that didn't go anywhere. So we were on it. My husband is Swiss, and speaks fluent German, which is helpful. We were in Switzerland, and I said, "Hey, do you mind if we drive up to the German archives and just see if we can get in?" And so we drive up to it's about 2 hours away. There's barbed wire around the whole place. So it's pretty imposing. So we go to the guard gate, and I say, "I'd like to get in and look at the archives." And he goes, "Do you have an appointment?" in German. And I said, "No." And he goes, "Well, you can't get in." I said, "Please, I'm from Florida." And he said, nine. So I said, "I've got to tell you the story. But for the humanity of a German pilot, I wouldn't be here." And so my husband is behind me, translating for me.
Right.
And I said, my father's plane was shot to hell. An enemy 109 had taken out some hydraulic lines and oxygen lines, and it started a strong fire. So they had to bail. And my father was the second to the last to bail. As he's hanging from the parachute, he sees a dot in the sky coming back, and he had heard rumors that the German pilots would use target practice for the parachutes so that
Yeah.
the airmen would fall to their death. So he's going, I'm sure he said a few expletives, and he said, "All I can do is turn and face this guy. I'm just going to face him, and come what may." And he said, "It's no better than being in a burning airplane." So he's flying there. The enemy comes, he sees that it's an ME-109. And if an ME-109 has a clear canopy, so
Right.
the pilot can look all around. So as my father's hanging there, Bob's hanging there, the enemy plane goes under him. The pilot looks up and salutes Bob, and Bob's looking down, dumbfounded, going, "Amazing." The guy said, at least he made it through that. So the guy at the guard at the guard gate let me through. He said, "Just go ahead." And what was great was finding those records. Not only did he claim Bob's plane, but he also was flying in the Bay of Biscay, which is south of UK and east of Portugal and Spain and France, around there, big body of water. He was flying combat missions at the same time John B. was there. I couldn't corroborate that they were in the same location, but they were there at the same time, the same month they were in the same waters. And I can't help but believe the universe puts people together in interesting ways. And so that was, I had many discoveries like that. And I don't even know how I got to this answer from your question, but it was a great question. I forgot what the question was.
I have two, because that was such a great answer that I forgot where we even began.
I
Yes.
do. I will say one of the things that interested me the most was that it's no secret to people that listen to Winnie and I, we're avid researchers of the air war, and we're passionate, we'll say, about the B-17. This was my first real foray, right? And I think I said this to you. I said, "Winnie, I don't know that we know this much about a B-24 yet."
No, we don't. We were quite worried that we would get things wrong, and that we wouldn't have good questions or good answers. But getting into the book, I feel like we learned so much.
The first thing I remember calling you when I read at the beginning about tidal wave, and anybody that's done research on Operation Tidal Wave knows they flew at 0 altitude.
Right.
Yeah.
And I said, holy shit.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
I said,
It is
holy shit.
crazy,
I said,
crazy.
they flew 100 feet off the ground.
Yes. Yeah.
Isn't that insane?
They had stacked formation.
Yeah.
So 3 planes would fly together, kind of as a wing.
Right.
And
Right.
one guy would be at 50 feet, one at 100, and one at 150. So they're wingtip to wingtip, sort of,
Yes.
really close.
Yeah.
And when you're flying low, I don't know if you know, but when you're flying low, there are thermals on the ground that make it harder. Most pilots want to, when they're taking off, they want to get up high fast, because
Right.
thermals, if you're flying low, the thermals make you, dip and, go up and
Right.
down.
Right.
Plus, they were loaded with full bombs.
Full bomb load. Yeah. Full
They had,
payload.
I don't know, 9,000 pounds of bomb. Plus, they had, I
Uh-huh.
don't know how much the fuel weighed, but it was like 20,000 pounds or whatever.
And
Plus,
the
Insane.
libs are a little bit bigger than the fortresses. So
They're
I'm
not-
like, not by much. I mean, they're both tremendous planes, but I'm trying to picture it in my head. I'm telling you, this had me gripped, that I was like, I even called my dad. I was like, did you know about this? He's like, no. He's like, I've heard of Ploesti and tidal wave. He's like, but I never knew they flew so low. I'm like, listen, let me tell you something.
Let me tell you what I just read.
Let me
Yeah.
tell you about what I just read. That and
Incredible.
that John B was on the cover of Life
Yeah. Yeah.
in
He
that
was,
big
Yeah.
group shot.
he was on that. He was also, when he was in training, he was in another picture
Mhm.
inside the as the face of Dead Reckoning. They were
Yeah.
doing a whole story on navigation. I do not know how they did it the way they had to calculate where they were. Even
Right.
the stars, or the pilotage was knowing what was on the ground. If they saw a church steeple, they knew they could go there. If they and then Dead Reckoning had to do with a few calculations, and they had a slide rule that was called an E6B that would help them
Right.
figure out where they were, together with the stars. And it was just, to me, unbelievable that they could cross the Atlantic Ocean. John B crossed the North Atlantic, and he had problems doing that as he took off from Manchester, around Maine somewhere, and then they would go over Iceland and ultimately
Right.
Scotland. Well, when he got not near the North Pole, his compass would go berserk, because as you get to the poles, it affects the magnetic
Yeah.
Right. Right.
your compass. And so they realized they were heading to the North Pole rather than England. So they had, make an abrupt right turn. So, you think, and not many guys have to experience that, because they don't go across the Atlantic when they're flying. It's usually, they're flying to a target. They're not flying that
Right.
close. Bob, on the southern route, went across hurricane force winds, and so there were clouds above them, so he couldn't even take a star sight. He's over the dark Atlantic Ocean and has to wait for an opening in the sky so that he can take some star sights. And he said that it was off of his desk, the stars, and he had to sort of guesstimate, but he still hit the dot in Africa.
Yeah.
How they did that, I'll never know.
I
It
was
always blows my
very,
mind.
yeah. And these are pictures Winnie and I have seen 1,000 times. And now I'm like, wait a
Yeah.
second. Now we know somebody in that picture. And
Now
you
we-
start
now
to
we
put
know
these
who that
pieces
is.
together.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very interesting, especially
Very,
that they
very
both
interesting.
had different, like, they were both excellent navigators, but they both had a specific foray in navigation that they were great at. So
Yes.
John B was Dead Reckoning. Bob was excellent with celestial navigation. And it
Yeah.
really shows that they were really, we use this all the time, two sides of the same coin,
Right.
that they were so fine-tuned in it.
They were very,
Correct.
I will say, their paths followed the exact same path. It's they both grew up in Hillsboro, this little bitty town of 4,000. It's a beautiful little town. They went to school there. They both graduated from University of Illinois. And Polley, John B.'s little sister, who Bob also grew up with, she also was born and raised in Hillsboro. And she was kind of a devil may care attitude. She was fun loving, had a great time, very social. But she always had a list of boyfriends. And interesting, Bob never got on that list. He knew the family very well. He was Polly's twin brother's best friend. to make it more complicated. John B was an older brother. So John B was an older brother, but Bob was in the White's home often, hanging out with Bill, the twin brother, and also looked up to John B, big brother. And Bob was otherwise, he grew up on a dairy farm outside of town, hardworking guy, but a really smart guy, good in basketball. He was the 1940 national trombone champion.
Oh, wow.
Very hard to get that. I have 4 years of all of his gradings or evaluations through the national championship.
Wow.
So he attended it 4 years, and he lost it by 1 point in his junior year, and he was so mad at himself. And then so he wasn't going to lose the next time. He was one of those that, you know, if I put my mind to it, I can win it. But he got a little overconfident, and, you know, was a little full of himself then, and not normally like that, but he thought he was a pretty good trombone player. So junior
People
year,
were so well-rounded back then.
they were.
I think we say this all the time, Gav, don't we? We say that they always had a niche and they always had something they were good at. And we feel like that's sort of a lost art these days. Like, it's hard to find someone who's good at something with their hands, like an instrument or something like that. I feel like it's sort of become like a lost art. Sure.
I think you're absolutely right. Everybody needs to have, it builds confidence and leadership to be good at something. John B was really good at debating, and to get his transcripts from his speeches, debates that he made, I didn't know about them, but I was reading my grandmother's journal from 1938. And I have journals that go back, and that's why I could sort of also see the feel of the family throughout all of this wartime. But she wrote down on her one Sunday night, she said, we listened to John B.'s radio debates on WLS. And WLS is a big Chicago radio station. I grew up with it because my Bob listened to it. And so I thought, oh, well, I'm going to call up WLS. I'm sure they've got the transcripts or the radio audio from 80 years ago. Of course they'd keep that, you know, and I go calling them or writing them in email, and they're going, are you kidding me? You think we keep stuff for 80? And I'm going, darn. So then
a lot of people do keep things for 80 years. I mean,
exactly.
Well, you gotta, if you don't ask, the answer is always no, right?
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
You have to ask.
That's the best answer, because if you don't ask, you have to be persistent in any of these projects, whether it be research, a book, or whatever you're going, you have to be persistent, keep asking. But so I kept asking. I went to his law school because I thought, oh, maybe they'll have an audio, you know, maybe they'll have it. Well, for months, I was emailing this guy. We were exchanging emails, and he'd say, I still haven't found anything, Jan, sorry. So I finally wrote him for the last time. It was, you know, a year into it. And I said, I'm not going to bug you anymore, but I just want one last ditch effort, you know, to try to ask, do you have anything? And he wrote me back, and he said, I was just about to write you that no, we don't have anything, but a retiring professor donated his materials to wherever, the library. And as they went through them, there were 2 years of transcribed radio debates that John B had done, and they were using them as practice tools to present day lawyers.
Amazing.
And the one that I used in the book was so poignant because everybody was at the theory was isolationism. No, we don't need to join anyone. And John B's debate was so poignant that I had to put it in there because it was just great.
Yeah.
But it was those little things that made it really fun searching for this stuff. And I do think the litigation paralegal profession, between writing memorandums, researching, interviewing witnesses, preparing them for depositions, all that fed into it, except writing a legal brief is very different than writing a book that you're sharing information. You're not just telling it, you're showing how it happened. So I had to learn a little bit about writing.
That feeds into it. The next question we wanted to ask was, tell us about your writing process and how long did it take? And what was it that kept you going, even though
Yeah.
things were getting hard, and it was something you had never done before. What was it about this story, your family story in particular, that made you
So,
want to keep going and share it with the world?
so I've always known this story. Like I said, I've all from day one, I feel like I've been bred. I was supposed to be named John B, which gave me um sort of a responsibility to also take this story. And also because they did such awesome things. That's the really thing that kept me going. But I kept finding nuggets. This, I kept finding every letter sent me on a clue to find something else. I fell in love with this friend of Bob's. His name was Park Chetwood. It's a great name, Park Chetwood. He was a world-class skier. He was on the front page of the Seattle Post. Carving a turn in the this is like 1937, and everything that Bob had written about him just made me fall in love with him. He was a fraternity guy, good looking, an aeronautical engineering major. So they were in navigation school, both regular navigation and advanced navigation. And so I wanted to find Park Chetwood. I wanted to find him. And so I looked everywhere. I finally, after months, discovered it was Gage P. Chetwood. His first name was Gage. So I guess he dropped it and liked Park. So he kept it Park. And I knew that they were picking up that Park had a yellow convertible because they talked about this yellow convertible. And I was on a mountaineering site, and I had also learned that Park's father died when he was 10, and a director had befriended him and taught him how to ski. And so that's how he learned to ski.
Right.
Well, as it turns out, the director was doing a Coca-Cola commercial, and he filmed Park's convertible back in 1938 with a Coca-Cola girl cutout hanging out the back, and they drove it up to the top of the mountain and the car, and then Park skied down. I don't know who brought the car back down, but it was just amazing. I saw the car that my father and Park used to pick up girls at the University of Texas or Rice University. I mean, it was just amazing to find that. That to me was a real gem. And I wish I could have put the video in the book, but the actual video, because it's really pretty cool.
Right.
But what kept me going is the fact that I wanted their story out. I really wanted to let everybody know what these airmen did. It's not just John B. and Bob, what they did, but all the airmen that went up in an airplane, whether it be a B-17, B-24, or these were heavy bombers,
Right.
B-26s, B-25s, any of those, even the fighter planes. I mean, those guys were doing something pretty new. World War II had biplanes, and in Europe they did bomb London, and they did do a little bit of that, but flying was a whole new thing. And I think it was exciting for these guys, and that's probably why they joined the Air Corps. But yeah, I think you had another question. I forgot what it was.
I wanted to ask, how long did the whole process take from beginning writing to finding a publisher and then it being released?
Right. That's a really good question, because I started this project. I started reading the letters in 2011. That's 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So the research probably took me the most time. So what I did originally, when I got the letters, I decided to write a chronology. I put the date of the letter, maybe even the postmark, and then I'd actually write the letter. And then I did the whole chronology. Then if I knew something was happening, like a certain battle was going on, I fed it into the chronology just to remind me that, oh, this is what happened. I also did a chronology of the National Archives when I got into them, because I knew if I was going to source this the right way, I had to locate exactly where I found it in the National Archives. Real number 2023 on page 22, and the title of the document. So I knew I had to do that. So I did a very detailed thing of that. I also got a book, and I'll call it my Bible of Ploesti. When I asked Bob some questions about it, he said, I want you to read this book. And it was the book written 10 years after the war. And it was these two guys were part of my uncle, John B.'s bomb group. And they were, before the war, there were news correspondents. So they interviewed everybody that flew Ploesti, and they would quote them. And it was very detailed on Ploesti, as well as what the 15th Air Force did afterwards. Tidal wave was the 8th Air Force and the 9th Air Force. The 8th Air Force had loaned 3 groups to the 9th Air Force. And then, but this book cataloged everything. So I actually did, by page numbers, the things that meant something to me. I wrote a chronology of that. So I have all these different timelines and chronologies going on. And then I melded them together. What I would do is I would write on a sticky. If there was a story, I'd write it on a sticky, and I had a big piece of glass, that was off of a table that we didn't use anymore. And I would put the sticky up on the glass, and then I'd write another sticky and I'd change the things around so that I would make a chapter, come up with a chapter. The chapters, then I would start. I didn't actually start writing the book until 2018. And it probably took me 2 years to write it, to actually physically type it down and write it. And I'd write it and reread it and write it. And then in the night, something would come to me and I'd have to go back and change it. And so it took probably 2 years of, and my husband will say I was obsessed. He'd leave in the morning to work and I'd be at the computer, and he'd come back and I'd be at the computer until I went to bed, because it was an obsession. I wanted to get John B.'s story right. So John B. and Bob's story correct. And so then once I got that together, I decided to, it was too long and it was too much information. And so I got a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. I found him. I said, would you read this and just tell me if it's worth it to go further with this? And because a cousin had read the draft, and they said, you have a good story here. You might want to take it further. So I said, okay. So I asked this Pulitzer Prize winning guy, what would you take out of the story? Because I need to take out, in order to be commercial, I've got to take out a lot. And he said, I wouldn't take out anything. And I went, that's not what I wanted to hear. I wanted you to tell me, take this out, take that, whatever. And he said, why don't you go ahead and print it for your cousins and then take out the stuff? So I printed that, because only my cousins would care about who Bob and everybody dated, all that stuff, John B. dated and all that stuff. So I took that, so I printed it, gave it to him, and then I started whittling away stuff that really didn't matter. And I got it down to a certain size that was okay. Usually a commercial book, they want 95 to 105, well, really 80 to 105,000 words. And I had 130,000 words. And so I knew how to whittle it down a little bit more. So then I got it down to where I liked it. My cousin helped me edit it, in the sense that she was good at grammar and she's really smart. So she read it. And then I knew I had to get an agent. So it was to the point where I had to get an agent, and I'm a nobody, never having written anything. And all my cousins said, are you crazy? You think this is going to get to a real publisher? And I said, I hope so. That's what my goal is. I didn't want to self-publish it, only because I knew it wouldn't get out to many. It would get out to 400 people and then probably stop, unless, I got lucky. But I knew if I had a publisher behind me, at least you have a lot more oomph. So my goal was always to get a good publisher. So the first thing is you have to get an agent. So I befriended Don Miller, who wrote Masters of the Air. And I said, and he told me a lot of the things I couldn't do in a nonfiction book. We got together and I said, I can't say that. I took it straight from a newspaper article. He goes, well, you can't make up words for dialogue. You can't have dialogue in it. And I went, oh, okay. Because I did make up dialogue based on stuff, but because it wasn't the true words, I couldn't use it. So anyway, so he sort of guided me on that. So I had to whittle that away. So in order to get an agent, you have to come up with a proposal. It's about a 50-page document. You have to come up with the subject. You have to do the elevator pitch. You have to do comparable books. You have to do how you're going to make money on this book, meaning what target audience are you going to go to. You have to do the characterization. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff, and you have to do a summary of each chapter. So it gets to be quite a long document. You can look it up online and, see that it's pretty extensive if you're a beginner. If you're somebody famous already, you just have to, say what the story's about, and they decide whether they want it or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Don told me, I said, Don, could you just tell me your agent and let me pitch him? And he goes, no, you're going to have to just pitch 100 agents and maybe one will stick.
Yeah.
I said, please, Don, please give me yours, because
Make it easy for
Yeah,
me.
exactly. Exactly. And he said, nope, you're just going to have to, because I think what happens is the agent has to be looking for your type book. Of course, his agent just did a book. His agent did his book. So they don't want another World War II book. They move on to something else. So the first day, so I thought, well, this is my plan. The first week, I'm going to do 2 a day, 2 Monday, 2 Tuesday. So I start out with Oprah's agent, and I start out with Reese Witherspoon's agent, and all the people, because of course they're going to love my book. Of course, of course. So I didn't hear back, by day 4, the only one that did write me back was Oprah's. She wrote me a very nice thank you, but no thank you. And I thought, well, that's great, because really
That's nice.
It was nice. You don't, I've heard they don't write you back. And then you're kind of hanging like, well, did they want it, or am I just waiting? Or so anyway, by day 4, I thought, well, I'm going to change it up. I'm going to go to military agents. So I found a couple that I liked, and I pitched him. And then we got to Friday and heard nothing. I'm going, great. Okay, so I got to find some more. Well, come Monday, I got a call from one of them that I sent on Friday. And he said, this is Peter McGeegan. Aren't you interested? And I said, what? You know what? He goes, I sent you an email. And so I'm looking for it. So I didn't have an email. It went to my spam for whatever reason.
Oh my gosh.
He's with Ultra Literary. And I guess it, for some reason, didn't like the word, and it put me immediately into the spam. And he had written me 45 minutes after I sent the email, which is incredible.
Oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
It was just blow me away. And, he told me later, because when we had a pre-release party here in Fort Lauderdale, he came down from New York for it before we did the Intrepid. And he came down from New York, and I told that story to all my friends, because it was a friend thing. We had about 200 people there. And I told them, I said, this is what happened. And Peter pulled me aside later. He goes, this was all by luck. I never call people back. If they don't answer my email, I don't bother calling them back. But, so it was just the stars aligned for me, and just super, super lucky. But then, so then he found a publisher, and the editor that I was working with had some other things going on. So the editing actually took longer than it probably should have. She had things going on, so I might not hear from her for months. Then we'd do 3 or 4 chapters, and she didn't really change much, except she wanted to hear firsthand words from John B. and Bob more than I had written it originally in 3rd person, except I had left in some of the things that I couldn't really recreate. Their words were perfect. And so she said, no, I want you to put it in 1st person. So I had to go back to the video, to the lines, the chronologies, and change it. And that's why we put all of their voices in italics. We still have quotations from all the official documents, but I think it's more compelling to hear their voice. And I hope the readers will hear Midwestern voices, because these guys had strong Midwestern voices. And very clear, very sharp. So the editing process shouldn't have taken as long as it did. But then they were going to release it in August, but by June, they had forgotten that it was going to be released in August. So they pushed it off to February because they weren't ready for the publicity stuff. So then we went to February of this year. And so it seems like it's been 15 years in the making, but there's still delays on, that nobody could really count on. And, but it was an interesting process the whole way.
Oh, for sure. Do you think you would ever do it again? Do you think you would ever say write a fictional novel? Would you ever write a novel again in regards to anything else you love, or would you like to avoid going through that whole process a second time? Is this your one and done?
No, interesting. Romania is an interesting country, and I've discovered a lot of wealth. Before the war, they educated women big time. That was a big deal. Bucharest was like the little Paris of the East. They had oil money, they had breweries and distilleries, they made alcohol a lot. So there was a lot of wealth. They had a lot of big homes. And I've often just in my brain, I have this story in my brain of somebody from World War II going back to maybe search for something, but it would be total fiction, because to write a nonfiction, I think you have to really know your story, and you have to know where to get the documentation to support it. My editor did a book for George Bush, so she was very much a stickler. If you can't back this, Jan, it's out.
Forget it. Yeah.
So I needed to make sure that I could back all of the sources, and a lot of it is firsthand sources from the characters themselves, and but a lot of it is the National Archives. But yeah, there's something in here brewing, but I need to get through the marketing of this book and enjoy
it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Enjoy this one.
Sit with this one for a little while.
Yeah, this is definitely a labor of love that that I've absolutely loved putting together, and I'm so happy it became a bestseller. That was the other thing. Yeah. That was sort of my goal, my high in the sky goal. I really wanted it to be there because I felt with that title that it can also get out to more people, a wider audience, which is in my heart. I really want everybody to read about John B. and Bob, but also them as their servicemen, the people, their grandfathers, their fathers, their great uncles, their, people that they knew. These guys did amazing things.
Yeah, absolutely. To wrap up, this has been such a great conversation. We would love to know what you would say to entice people in to read it if they haven't read it yet. If they see it on the shelf, what would you say to them to bring them in?
I think the bottom line is it's history with a heartbeat, a human heartbeat. You're reading. When I started this, I didn't know much about World War II. I don't think they taught it in school. People in UK knew a lot more. I mean, when I go over to UK, it's amazing. Well,
it's kind of iffy. We get the Blitz, we get Churchill's second prime ministerial power, we get rationing, we get minimal home front stuff. It's never anything beyond that. I was very lucky enough to grow up on the site of the friendly invasion. I grew up in East Anglia, so I knew a little about that. But it wasn't ever taught to me. It was something that I had to seek myself. And I only really sought it out after I'd moved away and I'd moved here to the US. So it's taught a tiny bit, but not as much as it should be.
Right. Yeah, and we get the bare bones of it here in the States in school. Right. I mean, at least when I was in school, you'd get, Hitler is bad. Right. And you'd get more about Anne Frank and, concentration camps than you would the blood and guts of World War II.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I think that's true. And I think, and maybe it's the visits that it's been to military people or older people that actually experienced it as kids, and they're appreciative of what the Americans did. I mean, at that time, we were the good guys. we helped then.
Right.
It's but I will say, if you grew up in East Anglia, you were right in the middle of everything, which is so awesome. The the Norwich Library has a great 8th Air Force library in it. And on
Yes.
one of the end caps is a picture of John B. And
Really?
yes,
I
and
never knew that.
but let me tell you this one.
Amazing.
Have you been to Duxford? The air.
Yes, I went when I was very young, and recently my parents came to visit, and my brother was regaling me of this tale of going to Duxford, and he had an excellent time. It was his first time. So yeah, I've been when I was very young, and I didn't know about all this, and I am very excited to go back very
Well,
soon.
I want you to go back. I want you to look at the B-24, and the picture that's in front of the B-24 that's facing the front windows
Uh-huh.
is a picture of John B.'s crew. 6 feet tall,
Amazing.
6 feet wide. I'll send you girls the picture because it's
Yes,
a
please.
phenomenal picture. And the first time I went to it's in the American Air Museum, which is right next to the Imperial War Museum.
Yeah.
Right.
And the first time I was so enamored with the actual B-24, I didn't even see the picture. I mean, and I know
Wow,
this picture.
yeah.
I'm familiar with this picture big time. So the second time I went with the 93rd Bomb Group, and they one of the guys said, "Hey Jan, isn't that your uncle?" And I was dumbfounded that,
Yeah.
I mean, I was just dumbfounded because the time before I was so, I do want to tell you one more thing about the book.
Mhm.
And it's about the B-24. Let me go back to the picture. So the third time I went with Don Miller, and I said, Don, I got to show you a picture of my uncle. And so we walked over there, and Don said, hey, we've got to get the docent over here. We've got to tell him, we've got somebody that knows who this is. So the docent came over, and I didn't want to tell him who I was right away. Don was sort of ready to tell him, but I said, wait, just a minute. I'm pushing him away. And so I said to the docent, can you tell me about this crew? And he said they were one of the most experienced crews in the entire 8th Air Force. And that's why they're here 6 feet tall. It's huge. I stood next to it, and I said, I turned to Don and I said, see, this is a great story. And he started laughing. And then I told the docent, of course, who I was. And then I got a picture of Don with me next to my uncle. But I will tell you, that to me is amazing. The fact of the thousands of guys that were over there, and I've got my uncle in the Imperial War Museum, American Air Museum there.
Yeah.
It's just phenomenal. But getting back to the B-24, I took a ride in a B-24 about 10 years ago. Yeah, it was there were only 2 on the planet that were flying, only 2.
Mhm.
And I flew in Witchcraft, which was one of them. And we got up to about 2,000 feet. They didn't go any higher. They flew at a low altitude. The guys in World War II flew at 24,000.
Right.
John B flew at 50 to 100 feet, 100 feet.
Yeah.
But we flew at 2,000 feet. And I wanted to get kind of a feel for what a 20-year-old would go through with this battle wagon, this old plane. The waist windows are open so that the machine guns can shoot out.
Right.
There's, cricks and cracks through everywhere, so the air breezes through. So when you get up to 24,000 feet, it's 60 to below zero. It's freezing cold. So you're freezing cold. If you take your glove off to fix your gun, if something jams, you can stick to that, or you can get frostbite, or deadly. You're also, you have a heat suit, and you're tethered to the plane itself with a line that heats your suit. You've also got a face mask for oxygen when you're up, so you're tethered to an air canister. You've got communications, so you're tethered to the plane, so you can't move very much. So it's tough to be up there. But when you start to go over the target, you see these big puffs of shrapnel exploding, exploding flak. And you have to fly right through them. They're almost as if they're close enough to where you could walk on them almost. But you're flying through them because you're wingtip to your brother planes, and you can't avoid them. So you're muscling through the concussions. A direct hit from, and the Germans are really smart. They timed these 88 cannons to altitude. So if it blew a direct hit, it could send a bomber down.
Right.
then if you're lucky enough to make it through the target and you turn back to base, it's the enemy fighters that come at you, and they're coming with 20 mm machine guns, and they're shooting to kill. If they shoot through that thin aluminum skin of the plane, they might rupture a hydraulic line and cause a fire. So these men are fighting fires on board, plus they're fighting the enemy, that's trying to they're shooting to kill. If they're lucky enough to land their plane at the air base, they give them a shot of whiskey. They drink, some of them ask for two because they just saw their buddies get shot down. They didn't know what happened. So they pad their way. They walk to their tent. They might pass the empty tent of the guys that they ate breakfast with upstairs at first this morning. And then, they were shot down. So it's got to be a surreal feeling looking into that empty tent. So they go back to their tents. All they want to do is decompress. They want to write a letter home. They want to know gossip from home. Who's dating who's getting married, what'd you eat tonight? Right. And they always ended it with, everything's okay here, but I better go to bed now because I've got to go back upstairs tomorrow. That was their symbolism that they were going back upstairs. It was fearsome to be in these planes. And these letters were lifelines home so that they could make it back up there again and do the same thing where they come back. If they made it through the flak and the cold weather and the enemy fighters and the fires on board, they get that shot of whiskey again, it would be another lucky day. Right. But just amazing things they did.
Absolutely. And it is such an amazing story that you have written. Gabby and I thoroughly have enjoyed reading it, and this conversation has been such a pleasure. And if this doesn't entice people to read it, I don't know what will.
Right. Short of us saying it was so good, go out and get it.
So good.
It really was good, guys. Go out and get it.
I'm so glad, and I hope you have a better appreciation for the B-24 that does not get the credit that the B-17. The B-17 was the pretty boy that was close to London, so all of the newspaper people would go to the B-17s. But I will say there were more B-24s built than any other plane, at least in America. I think there was a Russian plane that they built more. It was a Russian fighter, but they made more B-24s. But B-24s were also the ones that they sent on longer missions, more dangerous missions. Not more dangerous. B-17 went on dangerous missions too, but the B-17s could get out of there not faster because the B-24 was actually faster, and that's why they sent so many of them in. But they didn't expect the B-24 to last more than 25 missions when they built it. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, back in 1945, there were articles written that said the 15th Air Force out of Italy had 100% casualties in 1944 of airmen. That means they usually kept a group of 20,000 airmen, and they would lose 20,000. Every time they lost somebody, they refilled it. So they had to refill it 100% for that 1944 because there were so many planes shot down. Wow. It's a dangerous air war, and
absolutely
super dangerous.
Very, very dangerous.
War is hell.
War is absolutely hell.
War is hell.
Absolutely, it is.
And it's made up. It's the generals and the commanders and the politicians that come up with it, but it really boils down to it really affects the individuals rather than the politicians back home. And
it does.
Absolutely.
You guys are great with this World War II. I'm so happy you're promoting it. It makes me really happy to see a podcast focus on World War II.
Yeah, we're trying our best.
We are.
We think we're doing the best that we can with the knowledge that we have, and we're so lucky to have such a great group of people surrounding us and assisting us with records and people falling down rabbit holes with us, and we get to all read these amazing books like yours together, and it truly is such a pleasure. And then we get to have conversations like this with great people like you, and we're really, really pleased to be doing it. So thank you for saying that.
Well, thank you for all you do, and just remind everybody, this is a great story, and it's a story about all servicemen. If we don't remember these stories, they become abstract and we lose the real cost of war. So it's important to share these stories.
Absolutely, it is.
It
And thank you
is.
so much for joining us today. And
Thank
thank you,
you.
everyone, for listening. Go out and buy the book, The
Yes.
Navigator's Letter. Go out and get it, go read it, and we can all share our reviews together. Drop us a line. You'll be great.
Yeah.
Thanks
Right.
so much, guys. I really appreciate
Of
it.
course.
Jen, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for joining us. And everybody, thank you for listening as always. We will see everybody real soon.
See you next time. Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.